All right, AP Euro, welcome to your Enlightenment chapter. This will be chapter 17, The Age of Reason and the Enlightenment. This can be a little bit overwhelming because of the sheer volume of people and kind of philosophical ideas. So we're going to do the best we can. Take some notes here and really, more than anything else, I think, get the big picture of what this time period is all about. So here's an overview broken up into categories. So political history is going to see a reform in this time period because they're going to take God out of being the cause of these events in history. So you're going to get a little bit more of an accurate history. Intellectual history, you see Newtonian off of Isaac Newton. The influence, obviously, of the Enlightenment comes from scientific revolution and humanism. You see the movement towards the use of reason, individualism, again, that humanism and secularism of the Renaissance, increased literacy in this time period. And a real big economic shift happens as well as we begin to move away from mercantilism and towards capitalism because of the influences of people like Adam Smith and Keynesset, Francois Keynesset. All right. Britain, politics in this time period in the 1700s. Britain's a constitutional monarchy, meaning they have a monarch, but he is limited to some degree by a constitution. France is still embroiled in royal absolutism, but they do have cultural and religious unity. Prussia and the Habsburg Empire and Russia have enlightened despotism, meaning they have absolute monarchs, but people who are trying to care for their people, such as Frederick the Great, Catherine the Great, and Joseph II. The Ottoman Empire in this time period is the good old-fashioned traditional empire. So what are the origins of the Enlightenment? Again, scientific in origin. Newton's system was synonymous with the empirical and the practical, following these, the reason behind scientific method. People say, well, we should apply that to everything in life, not just science. Yeah, William Blake's painting of Newton. All this shows is that Paris is like the center of the sciences in the 1700s. They have 2 of 5 in 1700, and then they have 29 of a total 65 by almost the end of the century. You start seeing more scientific branches, zoology and biology here at a Royal Academy in London. Yeah, chemistry and botany gardens. Science is taking over. People are exploring the world around them. We have natural history collections, cocoa plant drawing. We're cataloging nature around us. Again, collection of insects, basically beetles here. Modern museums. This is the origination of modern museums in the 1700s. Women are actually going to begin sliding in there a little bit and getting some acclamations in science and other areas. All right, religious, physical theology, an attempt inspired by science to explain God's providence by reference to his work in nature and not primarily through his biblical word. Basically, support of a rational religion free from mysteries, miracles, and superstitions. That God's not saving people because they prayed to him. That this is a belief in God, but that you can kind of use science and reason to prove his existence and how he works. Deism's another important one. Deists believe in God, but that he's this real distant God, that he's not going to intervene on your behalf or on the behalf of someone else. You're not in a battle and you pray to God and he chooses your side over the other side. So they don't really see a point in any particular religion, whether it be Catholic, Protestant, or whatnot, because he's just uninvolved in the daily life of man. Pantheism's a little bit different. The belief that God and nature are one and the same thing. Gradually, highly educated Protestants and Catholics thought more about God's work as revealed through science, rather than through the scriptures. So that's interesting. We're getting away from the Bible as the authority, even though that was what Protestants, under Martin Luther, of course, the Bible was the authority. We're beginning to change a little bit of that. Here you have a map that shows you centers of the Enlightenment. It's big in Paris, in Italy, and England, and it moves out into Germany as well, and a little bit up in Scandinavia. Rationalism. Reason is the arbiter of all things. That's a huge characteristic of the Enlightenment that you should know. It is based off of reason. That's why it's called the Age of Reason. Cosmology, a new concept of man, his existence on Earth, and the place of the Earth in the universe. Obviously, you can see the play from that off of Galileo and Copernicus's heliocentric theory. Secularism, you're going to see application of the methods of science to religion and philosophy. We're moving away from religion as being the answer for everything. Scientific method, of course, is huge. So you see this blending from the scientific revolution into the Enlightenment based off of mathematical analysis. You have to experiment. There's inductive reasoning that's going on. You see a rise of a group of people called the utilitarianists, who basically their philosophy is the greatest good for the greatest number of people. So, basically they would be okay with killing baby Hitler if you could time travel, because while it would be the murder of an innocent child, we know that child's going to become Hitler. And so he's going to murder millions and millions and millions of people. And so for them, it works. Kill him. Move on with it. A lot of tolerance in the Enlightenment. Basically, the idea that no opinion is worth burning your neighbor for. And think of this coming off the heels of the religious wars in Europe. Basically, this is a clapback at that. It's we're tired of murdering millions of our own for religion. That's insane. If someone believes differently than you, that's fine. It's certainly not worth killing them for, and it's not worth dying for yourself. A lot of optimism and self-confidence comes out of the Enlightenment. The belief that man is basically good, that people are good, and that there's social progress, that we are. And I'm sure they see it that way because they're not killing each other for religion. If you look back at the 100 years before them, they were. And so they do believe in social progress. They do believe that each generation is getting better than the generation before it. Freedom of thought and expression, the idea of bringing liberty to all men. Again, this is a pushback against absolutism. They've seen enough of that. They want more of republicanism. They want the masses educated. Education is the bedrock of this thing. I mean, how are you going to have reason? How are you going to do these scientific method studies without education? I also see a lot of legal reforms, more justice, kindness, and charity. Once upon a time, before the Enlightenment, torture was a very public event, and it was used heavily. And due to the Enlightenment, you're going to see a decrease in corporal punishments. You see constitutionalism, written constitutions that list citizens' rights, such as the Constitution of America, as an example. Certainly, our revolution is majorly influenced by the Enlightenment. And cosmopolitanism, basically a blending and diversity of peoples. The philosophes, these were philosophers. Originally, most of them came from France, but a philosophe can refer to a philosopher from England, America, or in these other places. Not really original thinkers as a whole, but were great publicists of the new thinking. They are behind a lot of change and progress in this time period. They were students of society who analyzed its evils and advanced reforms. They're trying to create a better world when it all comes down to it. A world where people have more equality, where people are not ruled by superstition, and a world where we care about our brother and sister. All right, so the great debate, if you will, reason and logic versus the old school traditions and superstitions. And the old school, the conservative, is basically this nostalgia for the past. And this is the way it's always been, and we miss it. Organized religions would be on that side, rationalism, things that just don't make sense, basically, and a lot of emotionalism. Whereas reason and logic, they're going to champion, rationalism, empiricism, tolerance, skepticism, doubt something until you can prove it, and deism are all aspects of reason and logic in the Enlightenment. All right, now we're going to start getting into some of these people. This is where flashcards come out. All right, the Marquis de Condorcet writes Progress of the Human Mind, an expectation of universal happiness, where every individual, guided by reason, could enjoy true independence. He advocated a free and equal education. That's incredible. Constitutionalism and equal rights for women. You're really starting to see in the Enlightenment, more so than the Renaissance, right? Where we talked about if the women had a Renaissance. In the Enlightenment, a couple hundred years later, we're finally starting to see women breaking through a little bit. Of course, the famous John Locke writes a letter on toleration in 1689. He's famous for his 2 treatises of government in 1690, some thoughts concerning education, so he's well written. The reasonableness of Christianity, all works of his. He believes that the individual person must become a rational creature, that we can't base our lives off of superstition. He thinks that virtue can be learned and practiced. Basically, you can take somebody who's not a good person and you can teach them how to be a good person. He believes that human beings possess free will. They should be prepared for freedom and how to act when they get it. Obedience should be out of conviction, not out of fear, basically meaning that you should obey because you realize it's the right thing to do, obeying the right type of person. Legislators owe their power to a contract with the people. Basically, this is a government of the people, by the people, and for the people, which should sound familiar to you, being as we use it in our Declaration and Constitution. Neither kings nor wealth are divinely ordained. He doesn't believe that. He doesn't believe that God gives you money, that he gave you money, that he gave you the ability to get more money than other people. He doesn't believe in absolute monarchy, none of those things. He believes there are certain natural rights that are endowed by God to all human beings. He believes that all human beings are guaranteed to life, liberty, and property. And again, he is firmly against absolute monarchy. He favored a republic as the best form of government, and kudos to him. We're going to borrow a lot of his ideas and we're going to form a republic, and it worked out pretty good for us. Now, this guy, read him in college. His writing is difficult to read, but Immanuel Kant, Critique of Pure Reason, What is Enlightenment in 1784, Metaphysical Foundations of Natural Science in 1786. A lot of his stuff is over my head. But some of his philosophies: dare to know, don't be afraid of knowledge. He introduced the concept of transcendentalism. Some things are known by methods other than empirically. The belief in the existence of a non-rational way to understand things. Okay, so he's a little bit out there. The existence of neither time nor space is determined by empirical understanding. These types of things are a priori. They transcend sensory experience. They are pure, not empirical. Concepts like faith, pre-existence, life after death, basically things you can't necessarily prove is what he's talking about, that you have to transcend this life to understand them, or you have to have a transcendental moment of understanding that these things aren't necessarily rational. Our boy Thomas Paine, who wrote Common Sense and really helped kick up some patriot fervor in the American Revolution. He also writes The Rights of Man in 1791. He is an American philosopher, if you will. And some other American philosophers are here: John Adams, second president of the United States; Ben Franklin, our most famous American for a long time until George Washington, huge architect for the unity of America; and of course, Thomas Jefferson, third president, writer of the Declaration of Independence, who puts in there life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Obviously, he read John Locke. Voltaire is one of the more famous Enlightenment philosophers. His real name was Francois Marie Ariet. He wrote essay on the customs and spirits of nations. Candide, he's very famous for, and also a philosophical dictionary. Voltaire is fun, and I'm going to give you a few Voltaire's wisdoms here, some quotes of his. Remember, he is satirical writer. He's very, very intelligent. Every man is guilty of all the good he didn't do. God is a comedian playing to an audience too afraid to laugh. If God did not exist, it would be necessary to invent him. It is dangerous to be right when the government is wrong. Love truth and pardon error. Judge a man by his questions rather than by his answers. Men are equal. It is not birth, but virtue that makes the difference. Prejudice is opinion without judgment. The way to become boring is to say everything. I may not agree with what you have to say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. That's always one of my favorite quotes. All right. So Voltaire, Voltaire is a guy he's in Paris, but he's French, but he is well liked by English as well. He attacks clerics and leaders, and so he becomes sort of an enemy of the state. They exile him for a couple of years, and he goes to England to live. But he's definitely a freedom of speech kind of guy. All right, next is David Hume, who writes The Natural History of Religion. His belief in God rested on superstition and fear rather than on reason. So a little bit different there. Edward Gibbon, who writes The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, pointed out problems with contemporary England, and he tries to urge reform there in England, which some of the philosophers saw England as being far more progressed than France and Austria and other places in Europe. All right, the Baron de Montesquieu, who wrote Persian Letters and On the Spirit of Laws. He's a big one. Remember him. And he's got some things that are very important. He believed that there were three types of government in existence: monarchies, republics, and despotism. Despotism is any kind of dictatorship or where a group of people own all the power. All right. And that's a really, really good and basic way to break up governments. All right. A separation of political powers, in his belief, ensured freedom and liberty. And again, what does America do? They take his ideas, and we have a separation of powers. We have three branches of government. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, another big dog, writes a discourse on the sciences and arts. Emile, I'm not exactly sure. The Social Contract is his biggest one and most famous. Does progress in the arts and sciences correspond with progress in morality? No. That just because we're becoming more advanced scientifically does not mean that we are better people. As civilization progresses, they move away from morality. He's afraid of this. Science and art raised artificial barriers between people and their natural state. Therefore, the revival of science and the arts had corrupted social morals and not improved them. So he's not a huge fan of the scientific revolution. Virtue exists in the state of nature, but is lost in society. That's interesting. Government must preserve virtue and liberty. It's the government's job to preserve those, in his opinion. Man is born free, yet everywhere he is in chains. The concept of the noble savage, that men are noble savages, and liberty, equality, and fraternity, which will be the slogan, of course, of the French Revolution. Civil liberties invest all rights and liberties into a society. People will be most free, according to Rousseau, and moral under a Republican form of government with direct democracy, basically majority rules. However, the individual could be forced to be free by the terms of the social contract. He provided no legal protections for individual rights. So that's why America did good by taking the best ideas of these philosophers and making them into something just incredible. Rousseau's thinking, he had great influence on the French revolutionaries. His attacks on private property inspired the communists of the 19th century, such as Karl Marx. Now, popularizing the Enlightenment. Here is a salon. These are important. These Parisian salon, meaning it's in Paris. Salons were these meeting place of thinkers that came to share their ideas. They were put on by women for men, and it's just a bunch of smart, deep thinking people sharing their ideas. Very important for the spread of the Enlightenment. The salonières, these women, Madame Geoffrin, Mademoiselle Julie de L'Espinasse, and Madame Suzanne Necker. Yeah, the French. All right. Other female salons. Wealthy Jewish women created 9 of the 14 salons in Berlin, obviously way before Hitler here. In Warsaw, Princess Zofia Czartoryski gathered around her the reform leaders of Poland and Lithuania. Middle-class women in London used their salons to raise money to publish women's writings. So the Enlightenment, very important for women's rights. You're going to see this early modern feminism coming out of the Enlightenment. There were female philosophers, such as Emily du Châtelet, a French noblewoman, who wrote extensively about the mathematics and physics of Gottfried Wilhelm von Leibniz and Isaac Newton. Her lover, Voltaire, learned much of his science from her, so he was attracted to her mind as well, and they shared ideas and became better for it. Denis Diderot, all things must be examined, debated, investigated without exception and without regard for anyone's feelings. It doesn't matter what your feelings are. What is the facts? We're all about the facts here. We will speak against senseless laws until they are reformed, and while we wait, we will abide by them. That's a realist way of looking at it. Don't believe in it, but we're going to have to abide by it until we can convince people to change the law. He's famous for writing his encyclopedia, Diderot's Encyclopedia. Complete cycle of knowledge, changed the general way of thinking. It was 28 volumes. It was alphabetical and cross-referenced and illustrated. First published in 1751. 1,500 livres a set. When it first started out, that's pretty expensive when it started out. Eventually, it would come down in price and would be available to more people, which, of course, would spread Enlightenment ideas and knowledge. All right, so here's some of his pages from his encyclopedia. And I know you guys didn't grow up on encyclopedias, but I did. I read the encyclopedia when I was a kid growing up. I was always fascinated by pictures such as this. And just, I don't know, I like to learn when I was young. Some more. I mean, it's just teaching you all these things. You can learn a lot from the encyclopedia. Now we have the internet, which makes it simpler, easier, and faster. But before the internet, you had these great encyclopedias with all this wealth of knowledge. You could just teach yourself to become so many things. Look at this. It's incredible. All right, and you can see how Western Europe, especially, and parts of Central Europe, really, really got around to subscribing to his encyclopedia. All right, the Republic of Letters. In the urban areas, you had a gathering of elites in cities in these places called salons. You had urbane, cosmopolitan, worldly. A lot of people going to see new music and art, literature, and politics. These urbane people are reading newspapers and the latest books. They're educated people. They're people who like education. A lot of your teachers, might be considered urbane, even though we're not very rich. Politeness, the idea of proper behavior. And reading during Enlightenment skyrockets. Literacy is about 80% for men and about 60% for women. That's pretty impressive. That's not too far off of modern numbers. Books were still expensive. They were about one day's wages for most people. And there were many readers for each book, about 20 readers for each book. So basically, that means that we share the book. I bought it, and I'm going to share it to other people who can't because I want to talk to them about the awesome stuff I read in the book. Novels, plays, and other literature coming out in this time period. You had journals, memoirs, you had private lives or diaries type stuff. You had philosophy, history, theology, and you had the first newspapers coming out in this time period and political pamphlets. Reading. There's not too many things I believe in more than reading. It's been the backbone of my education. What I believe in, I think it's incredible. And it certainly has educated our society tremendously. Here you can see some literacy rates in France and Germany. Okay. The must-read books of that time were Newton's, John Locke's, both of his books, as you can see there, Voltaire, Montesquieu, Rousseau, Diderot. So a lot of the must-read books then. Enlightened despotism. We mentioned this earlier in this chapter. Frederick the Great of Prussia, he's pretty good. He succeeded his father, Frederick William I, known as the Soldier King, and he saw himself, what he quoted, as the first servant of the state. So while he rules absolutely, in his mind, it is his job to protect and serve his people. He sees himself as a father to all. Another like him was a rare female ruler here, Catherine the Great, who ruled in Russia. And you can see she reigned for over 30 years. She was a German princess, originally named Sophie Frederick Auguste. And she would marry in and become a, enlightened despot. Now, you can question, was she a reformer or was she a despot? In 1767, she summoned a legislative commission. And then here she is fighting in wars in the Russo-Turkish War. She suppresses a rebellion in the mid 1770s. She partitions Poland for the first time. Second partition of Poland, third partition of Poland. And here you go. You see this division of land here. And Russian expansion under her. It kind of one of the things that she did try to do was free the serfs, and that was a nod towards her. That was great. She got so much backlash from the Russian boyars, her noblemen, though, that she eventually abandoned the idea because she was basically afraid of being pulled off the throne, which is probably a very real possibility. So I think that she was enlightened. I think she was just bottled in a little bit by circumstances, by the nobility around her. All right, Joseph II of Austria. His mother was Maria Theresa, who ruled herself in Austria. The Habsburgs, these are the Austrian Habsburgs. This is their family crest, pretty fancy. All right. Joseph II as a Holy Roman Emperor. He partitions Poland as well. Everybody's picking on Poland. He failed to annex Bavaria to the Austrian lands. He declares the toleration patent. He abolishes serfdom and feudal dues. So that's a nod in his favor. He failed to exchange the Austrian Netherlands for Bavaria. And Austria joined Russia in the Russo-Turkish War, but little was gained. We get another partition of Poland. And there's statues of Joseph and money of Joseph. He's a reformer, I think. I think all of them were. Frederick the Great, Catherine the Great, and Joseph the Great, they were reformers, with varying degrees of success. What was the legacy of the Enlightenment? Well, the democratic revolutions that began in America in 1776, continued in Amsterdam, Brussels, and especially in Paris in the late 1780s, put every Western government on the defensive. It basically shows you that monarchy is on its way out, that people just don't see it as the type of government they want anymore. Reform, democracy, and republicanism have been placed irrevocably on the Western agenda. And that's what you see today is this legacy now of democracy in the West. And when we talk about the Cold War and World War I, World War II and things, democracy, the fight for democracy will be front and center. New forms of civil society arose. Clubs, salons, fraternals, private academies, lending libraries, professional scientific organizations, people getting together to try to make the world a better place, people getting together to advance literacy and education. 19th century conservatives blamed the Enlightenment for the modern egalitarian disease. Once reformers began to criticize established institutions, they didn't know where and when to stop, is what they believed. Basically, they just want to tear down everything and try to make everything completely equal, maybe something sort of close to communism, socialism. All right, guys, that is it. It's a lot. It is. It's a lot to take in, but keep the big picture in mind that this is an age of reason because, influenced by the scientific revolution, but not every one of them. Some of these guys did not go with the scientific revolution, but an age of reason and a move away from superstition, a move away from absolute monarchy and move towards democracy and governments that supported the people. Those are really the salons, the importance of the salons advancing this, the move towards more women's education and more women's rights are all legacies of the Enlightenment. And so try to keep that big picture in mind when you're taking your notes on this. All right. Thank you, guys. See you in class.